There is an interesting debate in the philosophy of applied mathematics regarding the status of mathematical principles in scientific explanation. So some people argue that you should simply cite these mathematical principles in scientific explanation without explaining those mathematical principles in turn. It's okay just to cite them. But others argue that in order for those principles to actually play a role in scientific explanation, you need to include an explanatory proof, a mathematical proof of the principles in turn. So let me give you an example. This is a football and it has hexagons and pentagons. If you were to close the sphere only using hexagons, if you want to do that, it's not going to be possible. You need to include exactly 12 pentagons, otherwise it's never going to close. And this applies not only to footballs, but also some crystals, some carbon molecules in space called buckyballs, the shell of turtles, and also some microorganisms called radiolaria. So this is all over nature, and applying the debate to the explanation of why it's impossible to close this without pentagons, somebody might say, well, just cite Leonard Euler's plolyhedra formula, and then you will see that it follows that you cannot close this with only hexagons. But defendants of the other side would say, no, it's not enough to simply cite the Euler's formula. You really need to include an explanation of that formula, why that formula holds. If you don't do that, it would amount as saying simply that you can't close the cage because it's mathematically impossible. And why is it mathematically impossible? Well, who cares? So that's the current debate. My position is something in between. I argue that you do need to introduce some unpacking of the principles that you cite, but that unpacking doesn't have to meet the standards of mathematical explanation, because these are ultimately applications of mathematics in science. So the role of mathematics is to track down physical relationships. So in other words, if in that unpacking you are carrying out something that amounts to a mathematical proof, that's completely irrelevant, right? What matters is that that unpacking has to be insightful, right? It needs to give you information that will enable you to understand why this cannot be closed with only hexagons, but it doesn't really need to meet any mathematical standard.